Welcome to the Universal Peace Federation. My name is Ray Lapalkin, and at the Universal Peace Federation, we're a global network of individuals and organizations dedicated to building a world of peace in which everyone can live in freedom, harmony, cooperation, and prosperity. There are many critical challenges facing our world at this time, from poverty and climate change to conflict and inequality. At the same time, the rise of civil society initiatives and the expansion of Track 2 diplomatic efforts involving people-to-people relation provides new dynamics that can complement and support the work of governments in the search for solutions to our world's most pressing problems. The Universal Peace Federation has developed a strong track record of accomplishment. Our commitment to service, partnership, and cooperation are hallmarks of our work. Through forums, seminars, conferences, service programs, and interfaith peace initiatives, UPF is building a global network of peace builders to contribute to a world of sustainable peace in which everyone can live in freedom, harmony, cooperation, and prosperity. And our three mantras that we promote are interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. So our program today is titled Challenges to Widening the Human Rights Footprint in the Indo-Pacific. And this program was done with one of our partners, the Washington Times Foundation. And the speaker is Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett. And she's president of the Lantos Foundation and Co-Chair of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. So please enjoy this video.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Detrani, and it really is a pleasure and an honor for me to be with such a distinguished group of gentlemen. Dr. Jenkins has become a dear and treasured friend, but I know both of your remarkable background and Dr. Mansurov as well. And I think, quite honestly, I have more to learn than to impart in this conversation. But it really is a matter of such importance, and I'm just grateful for this chance to discuss these issues. You know, I'm speaking to you today from my home in New Hampshire. It's a rather gray and gloomy and chilly day as I look outside the window, and I'm afraid that's a bit of an apt analogy for the situation that faces human rights in the Indo-Pacific region more generally, and obviously very much so in North Korea. And I'd also like to talk about China today a bit, because I think as we look at the whole Indo-Pacific region, it is China and North Korea that, for different reasons, pose the greatest threats and the greatest challenges. I don't need to tell either of you, I certainly don't need to tell your audience, that North Korea remains one of the bleakest places on the face of the earth when it comes to even the barest protections for fundamental human rights. It is a totalitarian regime ruled by a quasi-religious dynasty that operates a vast system of gulags where dissidents and really anyone who falls afoul of the brutal regime is subject to forced labor, to starvation, to torture, and all sorts of shocking human rights abuses, the sorts of things that were, in fact, as you pointed out, reported on so fully in the Commission of Inquiry. This is a long and a tragic history, and it is very hard in many ways to find something positive to talk about, to look for where there has been progress or where there is a hope for progress. And I actually think that if we want to look for glimmers of hope in what is a very difficult and a very bleak landscape, we really have to look to South Korea and not to North Korea. As you know, in the election last year, a new administration came in South Korea with the election of Yoon Suk-yeol as the new president. And this has enormous implications, I think, for the future of human rights in North Korea, because sadly, under the previous administration of President Moon, I don't think there can be any doubt that the fight for human rights was significantly downgraded in sort of the pursuit of unification and deconfliction strategies around the nuclear threats that are obviously front and center in everyone's minds. To me, one of the most alarming examples of this devaluing of the fight for human rights under the prior Moon administration was the decision by the Unification Ministry of South Korea to revoke the registration of a human rights group. They were, their name was Fighters for a Free North Korea. It was run by North Korean defectors. And this group had for many years been sending balloons filled with leaflets and in some cases, computer hard drives, the things you can stick into a computer, into North Korea. And it was one of the few effective, very low tech, very simple means of bringing actual news of the outside world to the North Korean people, of breaching, if you will, the walls behind which the people of North Korea live. The Unification Ministry deregistered this group, basically denying them the opportunity to engage in this work legitimacy. And this was followed up by the South Korean parliament passing a law actually making this illegal, making it illegal for freedom fighters, for democracy activists, for human rights activists to put leaflets into balloons and send them across the border so that people locked in this prison could have a glimpse of the outside world. As you can imagine, this was deeply shocking to me, particularly as the daughter of two Hungarian Holocaust survivors. I remember growing up and hearing my parents tell the stories of how during those darkest and most terrifying days in Hungary, they would gather around a radio, an illegal radio, late at night, silently huddled around it to listen to broadcasts from the BBC and the Voice of America. And those broadcasts were to them an absolute lifeline. It brought them news of the outside world. It gave them true, factual information about the progress of the war. And most importantly, it was like a little light shining in the darkness. It brought them hope in the midst of these incredibly dark times. And of course, we know that after the war, this work, this effort to bring truth to people behind the Iron Curtain was broadened. We had Radio Free Europe, we had Radio Free Asia. And so to me, it was stunning in a terrible way to see a democracy like South Korea actually outlaw a sort of an analogous, much simpler technology, but something analogous, an effort to circumvent the Korean Iron Curtain, the North Korean Iron Curtain. So from my perspective, it was an enormously welcome development when the South Korean Supreme Court, just in April of this year, overturned a lower court decision that had upheld this law. Now, I am not an expert in the South Korean judicial system, but it's my understanding that there's a further review underway by the Constitutional Court, and that ultimately to really do away with this law, there will need to be some legislative action as well. It's not sort of like our American system where if the Supreme Court rules on a law, finds it invalid, it's automatically invalidated. I think there are multiple additional steps that have to take place. But at a time when there aren't a lot of victories to celebrate, this development in South Korea, coupled with a new administration that I think intends to reprioritize human rights and basically to be less single-mindedly focused on the nuclear threat to the detriment of all other issues relating to North Korea. And that whole other bundle of issues obviously lies at its very foundation, the fight for human rights. So this return to the status quo ante as it relates to the lawfulness of this means of communicating with people in North Korea is, I think, a very good thing. And look, there is a reason why oppressive regimes fear truth and facts, because nothing undermines their grip on power more than the right for their citizens to seek out knowledge and truth for themselves. And that is why I feel very, very passionately that we in the United States must redouble our efforts to break through this sort of information prisons that are holding people captive in places like North Korea. Now, when you talk about balloons, of course, Americans nowadays think about a very unwelcome balloon that not that many months ago was slowly traveling across our country. And of course, I'm talking about the Chinese spy balloon, which was much more sophisticated than the balloons that North Korean dissidents are sending across the border to North Korea. You know, equipped obviously with very high-tech surveillance equipment and who knows what else. But China is obviously the other huge, huge challenge that we have to confront as it relates to both human rights in North Korea, but in the broader Indo-Pacific and frankly in the world. China's authoritarian regime has become increasingly repressive in recent years. And last year, the re-election of Xi Jinping to another term as leader of the Communist Party has not only led to his personal consolidation of power, but it's been marked by the further decimation of civil society. And most importantly, a newly aggressive posture in the world that I think really seeks to offer an authoritarian alternative to sort of the rights-based system that for, you know, most of our lifetimes has really been led by the United States. Now, I don't think I'm saying anything that people in our audience don't know, and certainly that my distinguished colleagues here don't know, when I say that the geopolitical and moral and military challenge of our time is whether the United States and the values that we stand for, freedom, democracy, human and civil rights, freedom of religion, conscience, and belief, whether these values will continue to be the shared aspirational goals of nations around the world, or whether China's darker and more dystopian model, a dystopian model that not only doesn't seek to disrupt the abuses in a dark prison state like North Korea, but actually, you know, is North Korea's lifeline as well. Whether our vision will prevail or China's model, which it is aggressively promoting around the world, will prevail. One of the things that causes me the greatest concern as I try to answer that question for myself is the increasing doubts that so many here have about the vitality, the vibrancy, the resilience of our own system. It is certainly one of the strengths and one of the secret weapons, if you will, of any democracy, that it has the inner confidence to engage in self-criticism, that it's ready to recognize its own failures and shortcomings. That's what gives it this ability to reinvent and re-strengthen and revitalize itself, to emerge from difficult periods stronger and better than it was before, to keep seeking generation after generation for that more perfect union that our Constitution speaks of. And, you know, I think of my late father, Tom Lantos, who was mentioned in the introduction, the only Holocaust survivor ever to serve in the Congress. And he was one of the most passionately patriotic Americans I ever had the pleasure of knowing. But my dad used to talk about something that he called the hypocrisy gap. And what he meant when he used that word was the gap that undeniably existed between the enormously inspiring and high principles that were enunciated at our founding and that are sort of in that DNA of this country, the gap between those principles and, of course, the reality. We know most terribly and shamefully the reality of slavery until after the Civil War. But what he would say about this hypocrisy gap, the gap between our ideals and sometimes the practice, was that the magic and the beauty of America was that generation over generation, we were on a continual process of narrowing and closing that hypocrisy gap. And so when I speak about my concern about our own growing doubts about the resiliency and the relevancy of our system, is that we seem, to me at least, to have greater doubts than I can recall at any time in my youth. And it is one thing to, of course, be willing to look at one's own society's flaws and weaknesses in a clear-eyed way. But it is quite another to begin to doubt the underlying decency and goodness of your system. And I think that's something we have to push back against, because we are not on the brink of, we are in the midst of, I think, a very real battle for the future. And our chief adversary in this battle is undoubtedly China. China's newly aggressive posture in the world on every front, economic, cultural, and of course, military, is undeniable. This wolf warrior foreign policy is on display literally on a weekly basis. We can open the Washington Times and see there on the front page the latest sort of provocation there on the sea and in the air. And of course, the threats to Taiwan are real and growing. And we need to be sure that we have a powerful and a strong strategy to counter this new challenge. I would like to suggest, and this gets back to North Korea and the balloons and the larger struggle we are facing. I would like to suggest that one thing we can and must do is to dramatically increase our efforts to tear down and circumvent the Great Firewall of China, the means through which it keeps hundreds of millions of Chinese locked in what I sometimes refer to as a digital prison. This is an issue that the Lantos Foundation, which I am the president of, has been engaged in for many years. And the efforts and the commitment, financial and otherwise, of the United States has been woefully inadequate in this regard. You know, we know that China spends billions and billions of dollars annually to support and to sustain their Great Firewall and the entire surveillance state that they have built. And we have not matched, not even begun to match the magnitude of their effort. And, you know, you can always look with an authoritarian, totalitarian system, where are they spending their money? What is it that they most fear? Because that tells you what their greatest vulnerability is. And they know, they see more clearly, I think, sometimes than we see, that their greatest vulnerability is, in fact, their own citizenry. Any nation not built on sort of the consent of the governed, that is founded on the ultimately shaky foundation of repression and persecution and denial of freedom, they know that the thing they have to fear most are their own people. And we are, I really hope, there's new legislation in Congress, there are new initiatives that are underway. I hope we are on the verge of perhaps a greater and more robust commitment on the part of the United States, and I hope other democratically minded nations to finally begin funding and deploying and developing robust internet freedom technologies that can render China's Great Firewall irrelevant, ineffective, and ultimately obsolete. I do think, sort of for human rights activists like myself, who try to change the world through peaceful means, you know, we don't want to see war, we don't want to see destruction, we don't want to see that kind of tragedy brought on the world. But we also know that we cannot, you know, simply say, you know, what you do in your own house is your business, because that is not the foundation for a just world. And that is the kind of mindset that leaves millions of people prisoners in really dark and dystopian places like North Korea. So it is my hope that we will begin to really fund, develop, and deploy these tools to peacefully advance the cause of democracy and human rights in the region of the world that I think now poses the greatest challenge and threat on these matters. You know, speaking about the power of knowledge, the power of truth, the power of individuals being able to access that for themselves freely, I'd like to close with a wonderful true story from another time. In the 1300s, there was a priest and theologian and scholar by the name of John Wycliffe, who became deeply inspired by the belief that he was called to translate the Bible from the Latin Vulgate into the common vernacular, so that it was something that could be read and accessed by ordinary men and women, at least those who could read. And he became the target of immense persecution by the ecclesiastical authorities of his day, because this was considered a kind of heresy. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge and truth. They were the ones through whom this information could be imparted to the masses. And they viewed it as incredibly dangerous and sort of revolutionary that he would try and translate Holy Scripture into the common vernacular. Despite enormous obstacles put in his path, he persisted. And when he had completed his translation of the Bible, he wrote the following words in the flyleaf of that first translation. He wrote, "The translation is complete and shall make possible government of the people, by the people, and for the people." Now, to Americans, they say, whoa, wait a minute. We know who said government of the people, by the people, for the people. That was our own Abraham Lincoln in his immortal Gettysburg Address. But in fact, that phrase, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, has a more ancient patrimony. Now, I can't know, none of us can know exactly what Wycliffe meant when he wrote those words. But what I believe he was saying is that when people are empowered for themselves to seek truth, they also become empowered to build for themselves societies that defend and protect the rights of all people. And so as I sort of think about the future in what sometimes feels like a very, very bleak landscape for human rights in North Korea, in China, and in many other parts of the Indo-Pacific region, I take hope, and I see that silver lining in the cloud from the fact that we can, if we have the will, deploy the technologies that will enable people in these closed societies to have that lifeline of hope, that lifeline of truth, that lifeline of accurate information that my parents had in a very dark time in another era in our history. And it is my hope that we will have the will and that we will have the confidence as a nation to continue to fight to advance human rights and justice around the globe, and to harness the new technologies to enable us to tear down firewalls, tear down iron curtains, tear down digital prisons. So with that, let me stop.
I hope you enjoyed that, and a lot of wonderful information that she gave. She gave just a wonderful presentation. I just wanted to comment on a few of her comments. Mostly she spoke on North Korea and China and the difficulties that are taking place there. And I thought a key point that she mentioned was China's vulnerability is their own citizens. In other words, because it's pretty much a communist totalitarian state, the citizens are kind of the challenge for them to what they're doing is, again, in a sense, persecuting or repressing them and taking away the freedoms. We've probably heard all the stories about on many street corners, cameras with face identity and suppression of religion. So it really is to somewhat a totalitarian state where the Communist Party is ruling there. So they kind of keep tabs on their own citizens because they're afraid that if the citizens get too much freedom, then of course they'll change that style of government that is taking place there in China, and of course North Korea as well. And she gave some positive things, and she said, like, the people behind the walls need what she called a lifeline of hope, and talk about harnessing new technologies to tear down the firewalls and digital prisons that are taking place. So a lot of times, like in North Korea and China, they don't really have internet access to understand what's happening outside of their own country. So everything is just created from within. So they don't really have an understanding of the freedoms and liberties that many other countries have. So those freedoms are taken away from them through suppression. And so, of course, the hope through her foundation and the work of a lot of other nonprofit organizations and NGOs is to try to tear those firewalls down, give more exposure to the outside world, that the people can participate and understand what freedom is. So at the Universal Peace Federation, we have some core values that I'd like to read for you. Number one is God. We are one human family created by God, our Heavenly Parent. Number two is spirituality. The highest qualities of the human being are spiritual and moral in nature. Number three is family. The family is the school of love and peace. Four is service. Living for the sake of others is the model for a peaceful society. And number five is unity. Peace comes through cooperation beyond the boundaries of ethnicity, religion, and nationality. So if you like the programs that you saw today and these values and beliefs resonate with you, please get in touch with us. We have basically about 6 or 7 associations at the Universal Peace Federation. The program that you saw today was dealing with media or journalism, but we also work with academicians around the world, parliamentarians, spiritual religious leaders, arts and culture, and business leaders, economics as well. So trying to bring leaders from around the world who believe in these core beliefs and values that we can create a sustainable, lasting peace around the world. So if you'd like to join us and find out more about us, the contact information has been up on the screen. Our website, us.upf.org, or you can talk with one of our representatives that are shown up on the screen. And as always, I'd like to offer a free complimentary biography of our co-founders, Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Chahan Moon. So please get in touch with us if you'd like one of those, and thank you for joining us today.